Have you ever looked at your own life and quietly thought, what happened to me? The same music doesn't feel exciting anymore. Movies feel empty halfway through. You open apps, scroll for hours, switch between videos, games, chats, and somehow nothing feels satisfying. Even the things you once loved now feel emotionally distant. And the strangest part is, you are not exactly sad, not fully depressed, not completely broken, just disconnected. So here's the question, what if losing interest in everything is not laziness at all, but your brain trying to protect itself from something you haven't noticed yet? Because psychology shows that people rarely lose interest suddenly. Most of the time, the mind slowly shuts down excitement after months, sometimes years of emotional overload, overstimulation, stress, disappointment, or hidden exhaustion. And by the time you notice it, your brain has already changed the way it responds to life. This is the psychology behind why people suddenly stop caring. Imagine someone waking up every day and doing exactly what they're supposed to do. They go to work, reply to messages, laugh when necessary, watch videos at night, maybe even go out with friends sometimes. From the outside, they seem normal, but internally, something feels missing. Nothing feels emotionally alive anymore. This experience is deeply connected to something psychologists call anhedonia, the reduced ability to feel pleasure or emotional reward. Research from the National Institute of Mental Health and studies published in journals like Nature Neuroscience show that chronic stress can slowly affect the brain's dopamine reward system. And dopamine is often misunderstood. People think dopamine creates happiness. But neuroscience suggests dopamine is more connected to motivation, anticipation, and emotional engagement. In simple words, dopamine is what makes your brain say, this feels worth caring about. When the brain becomes emotionally exhausted for too long, that signal weakens. And suddenly, everything starts feeling emotionally flat. But here's where things become dangerous. Most people think the solution is more stimulation. So they consume more content, more scrolling, more entertainment, more noise. But modern psychology has discovered something disturbing. The human brain was never designed to experience this much stimulation without rest. A famous study by psychologist Dr. Gloria Mark from the University of California found that constant digital interruptions and attention switching significantly increase mental fatigue and reduce emotional focus. Your brain starts craving stimulation, while simultaneously becoming too exhausted to enjoy it. That is why people today can spend 6 hours online and still feel mentally empty afterward, because stimulation and fulfillment are not the same thing, and the brain knows the difference. Now think about this scenario. Someone spends years trying to stay emotionally strong. They suppress stress, ignore burnout, keep functioning, keep surviving. Eventually, the brain begins adapting to constant emotional pressure. According to research on chronic stress by neuroscientist Dr. Robert Sapolsky at Stanford University, prolonged stress exposure increases cortisol levels, which can affect emotional regulation, motivation, and even memory systems in the brain. This means the mind can slowly enter a kind of emotional energy-saving mode, almost like a phone switching into low battery mode, not because it wants to stop living, but because it no longer has enough psychological energy to stay emotionally engaged with everything around it. And this explains why many people say things like, I don't feel excited anymore, I don't know what's wrong with me, I just don't care about anything lately. Sometimes the issue is not a lack of desire, it is emotional depletion. But there is another hidden reason people suddenly lose interest in life, and psychology considers this one extremely important. The brain loses motivation when life starts feeling emotionally repetitive without meaningful progress. Research connected to self-determination theory developed by psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan shows that human beings psychologically need 3 things to stay mentally engaged: a sense of progress, a sense of control, a sense of meaningful connection. When daily life becomes repetitive and emotionally disconnected from these needs, motivation slowly collapses. This is why some people feel emotionally numb even after achieving the things they once wanted, because the brain is not only asking, what am I doing? It is also asking, why does this matter anymore? And if the mind cannot emotionally answer that question, interest begins fading. There is also a darker psychological pattern that many people never notice. Sometimes people lose interest in everything after experiencing too much disappointment, not one dramatic heartbreak, but repeated small disappointments over time, failed expectations, unanswered effort, emotional neglect, constant comparison. dreams that slowly stopped feeling possible. Psychologist Martin Seligman, known for his work on learned helplessness, discovered that when people repeatedly feel powerless over outcomes, they can eventually stop trying altogether even when opportunities still exist. The brain starts protecting itself from future disappointment by lowering emotional investment. In other words, the mind quietly says, if nothing feels rewarding anymore, maybe caring less will hurt less too. And that emotional shutdown can happen so gradually that people mistake it for personality change. But often, it is accumulated psychological exhaustion. Now here is the part most people never hear. Losing interest in everything does not always mean you are lazy, ungrateful, or broken. Sometimes it means your nervous system has been overloaded for too long without genuine recovery. And recovery is not the same as distraction. Watching random videos for 5 hours is not psychological recovery. Scrolling endlessly is not emotional rest. Constant stimulation can actually prevent the brain from resetting. Real recovery usually involves something much harder: silence, sleep, meaningful human connection, physical movement, reduced overstimulation, purposeful activity, emotional honesty, and most importantly, giving yourself space to feel emotions you have been suppressing for too long, because buried emotions do not disappear. Psychology consistently shows that emotional suppression increases mental fatigue over time. Research by psychologist James Gross from Stanford University found that chronic emotional suppression can reduce psychological well-being and increase internal stress responses. The emotions stay inside the nervous system, and eventually, the brain responds by shutting down excitement altogether. So if you have suddenly lost interest in everything lately, maybe your brain is not failing you. Maybe it has simply been carrying too much for too long. Too much stimulation, too much pressure, too much emotional noise, too many expectations, too little recovery, and eventually, the mind stops reacting the way it used to, not because you no longer care, but because somewhere deep inside, your brain became emotionally tired of surviving without feeling alive. The important thing is understanding this before numbness becomes your normal state, because once people start believing emotional emptiness is just who they are, they stop searching for the real cause, and that is when temporary exhaustion slowly turns into permanent disconnection. So maybe the better question is not, why did I lose interest in everything? Maybe the real question is, how long has my mind been asking for help before I finally noticed it?